Hello, everybody. Welcome to MXP Oakland. We are here to bring you some modern action and some great Magic coverage. I'm Reed Duke. Anurag already set the stage for us, gave us a great introduction, but allow me to welcome Jarvis Yu. Jarvis, I'm really pumped to be casting with you this weekend. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. It was very rainy earlier, so I was looking forward to staying inside and watching some Magic. It's sunnier now, but I'm still looking forward to watching some Magic, you know?
Yeah, I noticed the same thing where I am. I was like, well, I better go outside now because I'm going to be glued to the computer screen for pretty much the rest of the weekend. And it's actually true. We are bringing you the whole rest of this tournament. So we're 3 rounds deep already. So we're in the heat of the action. We have 5 more rounds of Swiss today, a cut to day 2, and then tomorrow we're gonna cover the whole day, 5 rounds of Swiss followed by a top 8. So we've got a lot of Magic to bring you, and it's going to be a great time. Jarvis, what can we expect from Modern right now? Like, can you give us a snapshot of the metagame? What decks do you expect to be major players this weekend?
Yeah, great question. I have been playing a reasonable amount of Modern, not for the last 2 weeks, but before that I played about 3 weeks of Modern to play RCQs at my local area. Murktide Regent, I think, probably the most popular deck. Indomitable Creativity, Hammer Time, Team of Rhinos, and Rakdos Midrange or Scam, however you want to put it. I think those are the top 5 decks. Richard Neal's deck, we should probably take a quick look at it because it is very out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I noticed that neither of these decks were on the list of ones that we expected. So this is really cool because Richard Neal has, at least to my eyes, like a brew. You know, it's not a joke deck. All the cards in his deck are really, really good. And I believe that he's put something together that can be quite effective, but it's not something that I had on my radar or that probably a lot of other players brought to the tournament. So when I saw this in the feature match area, I was like, oh, okay, we're getting a little warm up, rogue deck from the 1 and 2 bracket or something. But no, these players are 3-0, and we have Michael Chang with Dimir Mill against Richard Neal's mostly Boros deck. Tell us about this, Jarvis.
Just a quick rundown. I actually went looking for the origins of this deck because I was curious if it came from somewhere. Apparently made top 4 of a big Japanese tournament, basically just labeled as Jeskai Control / Jeskai Obosh. However, one key thing that Richard Neal, especially for the Dimir Mill matchup, there's a sideboard Emerald with Aeon's Torn. So a lot of interesting stuff going on here.
15, that's an odd mana cost. That's the perfect one to pair with Obosh. But yeah, thanks for doing that research for us, Jarvis. It's cool to see a deck like this break out, and it's refreshing to see that Modern is still a place where you can do a little bit of brewing. Like you're going to bring your reasonable cards. A lot of these do have the Modern Horizons 1 or Modern Horizons 2 expansion symbol, but it's nice that you can still combine the sweet cards in new ways and make something effective out of it. What do you think of Dimir Mill? This is a deck that is it's not off the radar. It's probably somewhere in like the 10th to 20th most played deck. What some people would call like tier 2. But every time I see it, I think it's going to be a joke. But then it's not a joke. Like, this is actually a deck that can win games. Do you like Dimir Mill?
I think I'm mostly in the same standpoint you are. I don't really like it as a deck, but I do recognize that there's certain decks that struggle a lot against it. I think specifically if your deck doesn't kill very fast or has a key card, there are ways you can get sort of abused by the fact that Dimir Mill operates on a very different axis.
Okay, I see that. And then that Emrakul that you mentioned in Richard Neal's sideboard, is that only for Mill? Does that have any other role? I mean, nobody's doing Painter, Servant, Grindstone in Modern, so sure. You're not casting the Emrakul. Is there any other purpose for that?
I don't really think so. I think the problem is Richard's deck getting to 15 mana hardcast. That is basically never going to happen unless if you somehow hit with Ragavan 7 times and somehow all of your other creatures die. But I don't really foresee that happening, basically.
So that means, you know, he did prepare specifically for this matchup. That's telling already. I do see from the turn that just transpired, Michael could, in theory, beat an Emrakul using the surgical extraction. That's a tough way to do it because, you know, even with Emrakul getting surgical extraction, the graveyard does get reshuffled. Plus, it would require leaving surgical extraction in your deck after sideboarding against an aggressive red and white deck. But you know, there's some play and counterplay here, and we're shaping up for an interesting match.
I'm not actually sure how aggressive this deck is. There's obviously 4 1-drops, but it goes like 1, 3, 5, 5, 5, 5. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it actually puts a lot of pressure on, barring the presence of Ragavan on turn 1.
Fair point, and we are seeing that. The dust has settled after an early game. Ragavan and Hedron Crab were answered.
To your point about Mill, like, sort of being unable to beat Emrakul, I think that's less true with the addition of Jace the Perfected Mind. And I also think another important card is Visions of Beyond, aka Ancestral Recall.
Wow, so you're saying the Dimir deck can sort of play maybe not a full control game, but a value game where they have some staying power?
Yeah, I think Jace is a big part of that, realistically speaking. You know, like, before all Phyrexia All Will Be One came out, I don't think there was really a card like Jace for that deck. And I do think it's pretty important in sort of these matchups where you can sort of expect the games to get grindier.
It's a good point. I tend to think of Mill almost like similar to a burn deck where you're trying to you're trying to piecemeal, add up the amount of mill of all of your one-shot spells to equal 60 cards. But I guess that's not the full story. And these Shelldock Isles with the value built into the mana base are going to play a big role in this game that has seemed to have slowed down a little bit.
Yeah, I think normally I find it interesting that Mill actually extracted the Blood Moons. I sort of view it as a card that doesn't matter that much often, but I think with both of the Shelldock Isles, you just want to get your value and prevent any shenanigans.
So here's that Jace Perfected Mind.
It's very dark.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a function of the art or the sleeve. But at any rate, Richard Neal was sort of shut down in terms of his initial rush of action, his initial rush of creatures. But he's got some cool stuff that is putting gas in his tank just by virtue of getting milled. So Timeless Dragon was eternalized. There's a bunch of Seasoned Pyromancers in the graveyard. Don't forget about that Obosh Companion. So he's going to be able to continue presenting threats, though, at a certain point, it's a race of can he get the job done before he's fully milled out.
Yep. Definitely you're trying to avoid the fire blasts from the mill deck. Blue burn, indeed. I think the problem with Seasoned Pyromancer is it doesn't actually kill very, very fast, right?
Yeah, 5 mana for just 2 points of power that's not really what you want to be doing in a racing situation, but at least it's something you can spend your mana on.
Whoa, both Timeless Dragons were milled.
All right, well, Timeless Dragon, that packs a punch. That's a little bit more value from the graveyard than Seasoned Pyromancer.
It's kind of funny. I don't think you see Timeless Dragon all too often in Modern. I think you see it a lot more in Legacy, weirdly enough.
Right, agreed. So I was wondering if this was going to happen, Jarvis. Richard Deal cracked what I believe is his first fetch land of the game in Arid Mesa, and it's met by double Archive Trap. So this is what I think of when I think of the very best draws from the mill deck. It's getting those free spells, and they're potent too. I mean, 13 cards to be milled, that's a big deal.
And I think we got a library count because of the Sheldock Isles.
Okay, if those are online, then this is going to be a big turn. Jace still on the battlefield. So with a -4, the Jace can mill 3 times 4 is 12 cards. What do you think about Richard's decision to not contest the Jace, to go straight after the life total?
I think it really depends on his hand, but I think generally speaking, trying to go for the Planeswalker to give Michael more draw steps to draw, say, more burn spells. Essentially, I would go for the face as well.
Ancestral Yeah, Ancestral Recall is right. But as much cool stuff as Michael is doing, he is facing down a potential lethal attack here.
Yeah, the problem is a single Crypt Incursion flips that script by so much. Like, did I call it? It was a Crypt Incursion? Looks like it.
That's going to gain double-digit life. And is that a concession from Richard?
Yeah. I think basically Richard realized, okay, we can't kill Michael before he mills me out because he'll be at like 45 life or some nonsense.
Holy smokes. Okay, well, that's game 1 for Dimir Mill. And for me, that's Richard feeling a little sense of relief that he decided to bring the Emrakul today. That is a specific and potent sideboard card for exactly this matchup.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think his hope is he just never draws it, but he does have Fable of the Mirror Breaker, so even if he draws it, it's not the end of the world. I think he would just prefer to basically never draw it, though.
So if you're in Michael's seat, what's your general approach to sideboarding with Mill? Like, are you gonna prepare that your opponents are always going to have a card like Emrakul? Are you going to, hope that they don't? Because this is a closed deck list event. They don't know what one another have.
Well, so I think just based on what cards Michael saw in game 1, it makes sense for him to side in any copies of his Soulkite Lantern because it just covers the Timeless Dragons and Seasoned Pyromancers that you mill, like you pointed out. So I think that's like an easy card to side in that doesn't cost you too much. Because in barring the worst case scenario, you can always just crack it for a card,
Okay, that makes sense. Soulkite Lantern is actually quite effective against Emrakul because you exile the whole graveyard in one shot. Okay, so yeah, there's some play and counterplay here.
Oh, it is somewhat telling that Michael also has a copy of Emrakul Landstorm in his side order.
Yeah, that one I don't expect to be great on that side of the matchup.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of funny. If Michael believes Dimir Mill is such a good choice, he also expects other people to come to the same conclusion, is the indication of that.
The old, my worst matchup is the mirror kind of logic.
I truly believe the Mill Mirror gets extremely messy, is how I would put it.
Yeah. Well, you're going to see me show up to the next Modern tournament with a 120 card mill deck just to be one step ahead of the game.
But I will root for you if you do that at Pro Tour Barcelona, but somehow I believe you will not actually do that.
Another card I want to ask you about here, and the sideboarding dynamic around it, is Hedron Crab and Ruin Crab. Because I wouldn't necessarily think of something like Lightning Bolt or Prismatic Ending being a strong card against Mill. In fact, the worst thing that can happen against Mill is you draw a really reactive hand where you can't put pressure on. But you do have to kill those crabs. So what are you thinking? Are you keeping in all your removal spells?
My instinct is I wouldn't keep in like all of them. I would shave the March of Otherworldly Lights. I'm definitely leaving in Lightning Bolt because it just can shave a turn off the clock.
That makes sense.
All right, let's see what we got.
All right, so this is a fetch land on turn 1. Keep an eye out for Archive Trap. That is, in my opinion, one of the most meaningful cards for the mill player to have in their opening hand.
It really is the Fire Blast, isn't it?
And this is a Relic of Progenitus. So is that one that you are surprised to see off the sideboard? Is that to attack Michael's graveyard, or is that to exile his own graveyard and shut off some of those draw 3 effects?
Well, I think if you try to go after your own graveyard, it turns off your Emrakul being an effective like gain 15 or however you want to parse it, you know? I think it's more for going after Michael's graveyard to make sure Visions isn't online from that standpoint. So yeah, I think Richard probably left in all of the endings and Bolt because they trade with the Crab for 1 mana, whereas March would be 2 mana.
Yep, sounds good. You definitely want to get that Crab off the battlefield right away. So a bit of a slower start this game. Turn 3, just grabbing the Obosh Companion. Richard elected to not crack the Relic right away. As you might have seen, if somebody's desperate to cycle for a land drop, something like that.
Obosh does kill very quickly if it's uncontested.
Yeah, I've been impressed by the Obosh Companion. We know from how many decks across a range of formats play Gigantha that just the simple fact of having a companion can be quite a big deal. But Obosh is particularly potent. That's one that really pays you off for building around it, doubling your damage output, being a huge threat on its own, pitching to a Fury if you need that to happen.
Oh, I think that was a cycled Fractured Sanity, correct?
Yeah, that's a great card because even cycling it gives you a nice little chunk of mill, and then if you decide the situation is appropriate to spend 3 mana on it, it's very potent. So Fractured Sanity is, I think, one that these mill decks have been very happy to adopt.
Looks like a Blood Moon.
Okay, so the Blood Moons that were a point of contention in game number 1, meeting the Surgical Extraction, that's now not quite on the battlefield, but on the stack at least. So here, wow, what a flurry of action. Okay, so Drown in the Loch attempts to counter Blood Moon. It's foiled by Relic being activated. So that's answers our question a little bit about what the main function of Relic can be in this matchup. But Michael had the free Archive Trap to sort of trump the Relic and effectively resolve Drown in the Loch. So nice little turn, nice exchange there.
A second Archive Trap. I'm really interested to see what did Michael actually, or what did Richard sideboard out to leave all of the Solitudes in?
Well, there's the secret additional option, Jarvis, of just going above 60 cards, which I wish we had the Magic Online or Arena program to count for us, but I don't know that we'll be able to identify for sure if he is above 60 cards, but that's something I've done before.
Wait, what happened? Tasha's Hideous Laughter ate the Emrakul.
Holy smokes.
I think that's a really, really, really bad sign for Richard.
Yeah, his aggression totally thwarted, got double Archive Trapped, lost his best sideboard card. This is really quite an impressive showing from the mill deck. I thought that, if somebody is packing the Emrakul in the sideboard, it would be playtime is over. But no, I mean, Michael just cruising right past the dedicated sideboard card, not really caring at all.
It can feel sort of random sometimes, because what can happen is, I think if the Emrakul were hit by the first 2 archive traps, the game would look very different. But the Emrakul happened to be right below the first 2 archive traps.
Good point.
So now Richard's just going to cast all of his creatures and hope he's not dead. Like, what else can you do here?
So normally I would think of Fury as being a little bit of an unexciting threat, but remember that Obosh is in hand. So that's a 3/3 double strike doubled is attacking for 12. So this game could be over in as little as 2 turns in one direction or the other.
Well, the problem is Michael just used the Jace to mill 12, I believe, and there were only 19 left. A draw step, so 7 down to 6. I think if Richard didn't sideboard above 60, there's only 6 cards left. Oh, wow, no, that's even... Sorry.
Jarvis, Richard has Obosh and Lightning Bolt, but not a 6th land. But still, he crashes in for 12. And is there any way we could see an upkeep victory before he draws the lethal card?
Yes, that would be awesome to see.
Okay, so we're going to see Richard Neal's library depleted, 0 cards. But, as experienced Magic players know, it's not milling the last card that causes you to lose the game. It's having to draw a card when your library is empty. So Richard is going to see if he can take any action to end the game before he gets to that point, his draw step in the next turn.
Oh, you love to see it if you're Richard. You hate to see it if you're Michael.
Is there a Drown in the Lock? Any response here? Any way to remove the Obosh from the battlefield? Wow, what a finish! That is as close as it gets. Amazing stuff.
I think, back to our first point, that just shows the power of companions right there, because Richard really had an unexciting draw, but how much damage did that Obosh output?
Yeah, it's a good point, Jarvis. It was +9 damage from the Obosh, and that's all without having to attack. Just doubling the Fury and doubling the lethal Lightning Bolt there.
You know, one of my favorite cards that never gets played? Furnace of Wrath.
Ooh, yeah, Furnace of Wrath. Didn't they print like a triple Furnace of Wrath lately, or more recently?
Yeah, there's a few variants. I don't remember the name of it, but Furnace of Wrath attached to a 3/5. That's a really powerful card, especially when you can pay 3 mana to draw it whenever you want.
Yeah, for sure. That was a cool game. I thought with Richard having the slow start and then the Emrakul getting unluckily exiled there, I thought it was going to be lights out, but we actually have a game 3 now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really sure what to expect for the 3rd game.
Well, we can take a look at this deck list at least. So I think the March of Otherworldly Lights probably came out. You probably trim Ephemerate. Doesn't seem great. I don't think it actually does anything, right?
Yeah, so Ephemerate, like you can use it to sort of cheat a Fury or Solitude onto the battlefield early, but it's not the type of matchup where you're actually going to kill multiple creatures all that often because of Ephemerate. So that would be, I think, certainly on the lower ends of cards that I'd be wanting to draw.
So a little bit of the Rakdos scam element in this deck, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, I view Ruin Crab as sort of like Goblin Guide for his deck.
Okay, can you elaborate on that?
Well, it gets in the early damage, the early deck depletion.
Okay, so in other words, just getting a couple activations or a couple triggers out of a Ruin Crab before it meets a Lightning Bolt or Prismatic Ending, is that an exchange you're pretty happy with?
Yeah. In that vein, I actually kind of wonder if playing it on turn one is what you actually want to do, right?
Yeah, as somebody who's often playing the sort of reactive trade-off resources side of this matchup, I'm always really happy when I can trade one of my crummy cards like a Prismatic Ending favorably against a Ruin Crab. So to your point, maybe you do want to wait until you can play your crab and a fetch land in the same turn.
Yep.
It of course depends on the context of your hand. So if Michael has a 2-mana play that he wants to make here, like let's say for example, cycling a Fractured Identity, then Fractured Sanity, then that can make sense based on mana curve.
So Richard Neal hit an Archive Trap. Michael is fetching now. So theoretically, Richard could Archive Trap, but I'm not even sure you want to do that.
Okay, so in other words, sort of a non-lethal mill. Like if milling's not your plan for winning the game, then it's not profitable.
Well, it turns on Visions of Beyond and the other card. I think Jace's minus might care about that.
Okay.
Let me go.
Shelldock Isle certainly could come up.
Yeah, no, so Jace's -2, if whoever you targeted with the mill 3, if their graveyard has 20 cards, it turns into a draw 3 instead of a draw 1.
And Jarvis, last game you brought up the question of like, hey, is Solitude an exciting card in this matchup? It seems like it wouldn't be because removing opposing creatures isn't that great. It's not a great clock, but that is a good effect right there. Is it just costs 5 mana for the purposes of Tasha's Hideous Laughter, which actually makes it like meaningfully different than something like Prismatic Ending, just soaking up a bunch of those, mana cost pips is a big deal.
Ooh, Teferi Time Raveler came in. Oh, that was not on my radar. Oh, I suppose this lets you fetch safely, right?
Yes, good point. So Teferi's going to turn off Archive Trap.
Turns out Drown the Lock as well, which is not irrelevant. I do wonder if Richard did go to like 67 cards or whatever number you want to pick.
If it was exactly 67, then it won him the previous game. So I think he took his last draw step with about 7 cards left in the library. I'd be surprised if it was that many. Just not that I've really dug deep into it, but at a quick count, it seems like difficult to find that many more than 60 cards that you'd be happy with. But we see the Prismatic Endings and Solitude staying in, Blood Moon in after sideboard, Relic and Teferi coming in. So it is possible.
I believe at most Richard could have 74 cards in his deck.
Richard actually has Hallowed Moonlight in the sideboard, which is not for this matchup anyway, but that's actually an even converted mana cost card. So that has to not come in if you want to maintain the Obosh companion. So by the way, that Teferi Time Raveler is the one blue card in Richard's deck. So it's a Boros deck splashing Teferi in the sideboard, which is why we have it labeled as Jeskai on your screen. But that's pretty cool. Can you tell us what matchup Teferi is really there for? Like why is that a card that's powerful enough to be splashed for?
I think generally these sort of Boros decks, if you don't have any blue involved, I don't think you really want to play against Living End or Crashing Footfalls, is my particular guess. And it's kind of just a good card in general, like when your creature removal's dead.
Okay. Makes sense. So the cards that I would normally turn to against a Cascade deck, things like Chalice of the Void, Engineered Explosives, Void Mirror, those all don't mesh with Obosh. So this is kind of a creative way to get around it. Pretty cool.
I also think there is value to resetting your elementals in certain matchups. I'm not sure specifically which ones, but it's worth a non-zero amount, I believe.
Checking back in with this game, it looks to me like things are going pretty well for Richard. He has been able to establish a pretty impressive clock. And, you know, Michael hasn't done any of the Shelldock Isle, Visions of Beyond, Jace type of stuff that would give him the influx of resources he needs to you know, really power to the finish line. But this mill deck can surprise you. So, you know, it's capable of wins out of nowhere, and this game remains pretty competitive and interesting.
Yeah, speaking of Visions of Beyond, we just cast one as reach through miss.
Oh boy, Jarvis, you pointed out the Jace turning off Archive Trap being a big deal. Michael actually has Archive Trap in hand, so normally one of the best cards in the mill deck in a situation like this. I don't know if you're going to have time to spend 5 mana on that.
No, I don't think so. Also, Richard being a kind soul, leaving cards known from Surgical face up.
I was wrong, by the way. Ephemerate, you know, at least 1 copy in after sideboarding there.
We're still alive for the like 70 card deck. So, good point from the chat. If Richard's last card is a white card, you can Solitude pitch white card, then ephemerate it, untap, cast Obosh, and attack for just like, I don't know, an unfathomable amount of damage.
Well, that's a great play, especially with the Teferi on the battlefield to make you feel safe.
Yeah.
The Emrakul gets milled, and yeah, that is Richard Neal. I'm going to say stealing this match. Game 3 was more decisive, but going down a game pre-board and then winning with 0 cards in library with the upkeep Lightning Bolt. That was great stuff. I mean, that was we really got to see both decks in action, an exciting finish, and Richard Neal advancing to 4-0 with this pretty cool Boros deck.
Would you qualify that as an, oh my god, it's Lightning Helix moment?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't technically a top deck Lightning Bolt, but I was down to the wire. I was on the edge of my seat there because there were so many moving pieces there. It's like, you know, Michael's deck has counter spells. He could remove the Obosh in response and then survive at 4 life against the Lightning Bolt. So I really didn't know what was going to happen at that last moment, and Michael didn't either, because he just sort of, you know, was looking at the table thinking, I thought I was about to win this game, but no, now we're going to game 3. And yeah, just great stuff.